Well, hello everyone, and welcome to this week's edition of NASCAR Mount Rushmore. This week, I go through the Mount Rushmore I have for Rockingham Speedway or North Carolina Speedway, whatever you would like to call it. Rockingham has a great history in this sport. This weekend, as I'm recording this on April Fool's Day, I'm recording this on April Fool's Day. This upcoming Easter weekend, we have the O'Reilly Auto Parts Series and the Craftsman Truck Series there at Rockingham Speedway. And hopefully, the Cup Series will be back in 2027. But I thought anyway, I would go through my Mount Rushmore for Rockingham Speedway. So let's get into it. Who is on the Mount Rushmore for The Rock? And the first driver on this Mount Rushmore shouldn't come as a big surprise. He's made a lot of appearances on my various Mount Rushmore videos, and it's the king, Richard Petty. And I would also consider him to be the GOAT of Rockingham Speedway. Richard Petty has 11 wins, 23 top fives, 28 top tens, and 3,130 laps led at the Rock. The king, he was great pretty much. Obviously, it was a different era. That's why he has been left off of maybe one or two of these Mount Rushmores, because he was in a completely different era where there wasn't quite as much competition as there is nowadays, or 20 years ago, or even 30 years ago. There was a lot more competition in those days compared to when Richard raced, when the king raced. His boy Kyle Petty actually had a lot of success here as well. He won here 3 times. So the Petty family has had a lot of success at Rockingham Speedway. And now let me move on to the second member of the Rockingham Mount Rushmore, and probably shouldn't come as a big surprise, one of the greatest drivers in NASCAR history, and that is Cale Yarborough. Cale has 7 wins, 22 top fives, 27 top tens, and 3,745 laps led. So he has the most laps led. I was even debating for a brief moment to potentially name him as the GOAT for Rockingham Speedway, because he did race here a little bit less than the king did, and he has all those more laps led. He's led a little more than 600 more laps than Richard Petty did at Rockingham Speedway in less races and having 4 less wins. But a very impressive career at Rockingham for Cale Yarborough, who's already made a couple of appearances on these Mount Rushmores, and I expect him to make many more, because he's clearly in the top 10 greatest NASCAR drivers of all time. I think there's an argument to be made for him to be in the top 5, and Cale, he's the second on the Mount Rushmore. Now we move on to the third driver on the NASCAR Mount Rushmore, and that would be the Silver Fox of David Pearson. These last 2 spots were a little bit more difficult to decide on, but the Silver Fox had to be on here with those 5 victories, 11 top fives, 14 top tens, and 2,344 laps led at the Rock. It's something about Wood Brothers and Rockingham, and pretty much any track back in those days, they were just so strong at, because we have both Cale Yarborough and David Pearson on this Mount Rushmore, and they drove most of their career with the Wood Brothers in that number 21. So I guess not a huge surprise to see either of them on this list. But like I said, for these last 2 spots, I was debating between a couple of different drivers, and I would have David Pearson being that third driver. But the fourth driver, it was definitely a little bit closer. And let's get to that fourth driver on the Mount Rushmore, and that would be Rusty Wallace. Rusty Wallace with 5 wins, 12 top fives, 22 top tens, and 2,067 laps led at Rockingham. Rusty Wallace, I've said it before, he was the king of short tracks in the 90s. And is Rockingham a short track? No, but in some ways it kind of does, especially in turns 1 and 2. 3 and 4 definitely has some good speed at the Rock. But 1 and 2, it kind of races like a short track. You have to slow down quite a bit. It really tears up tires. So you have to have that similar sort of mindset when you're racing on a short track to where you're racing at Rockingham. Similar styles of racing in that aspect. And I was debating on this last spot mainly with Rusty Wallace and Jeff Gordon. Those were the 2 I was really debating if I had to put a fifth driver on here, it probably would be Jeff Gordon. But Rusty Wallace finds himself on a Mount Rushmore, this time for the Rockingham Speedway. I wish I could talk more about these drivers and what they were able to do at the Rock, but I was way too young to see Rusty Wallace and some of his success at Rockingham, because when they stopped going to Rockingham, I was I was 7 at the time. I wasn't even 8 yet. I was 7 at the time when they stopped racing at Rockingham Speedway. So I don't really remember too much of Rusty racing at the racetrack. And obviously I don't remember Richard Petty or Cale or Pearson, but I had to look back at the stats and look through them a little bit, see who led a bunch. Because that's the first thing I usually look at is who led a bunch of laps. That shows us who was actually really great at the track. Some drivers will have DNFs and have incidents happen throughout the event and they couldn't quite get the finish that they deserved. That's why I was thinking of making Cale Yarborough the GOAT of Rockingham Speedway because of all those laps led. But 4 less wins, that's a pretty big gap right there. But just to go through my Mount Rushmore one more time, I have Richard Petty, the king, and he's also the GOAT of Rockingham Speedway, in my opinion. I have Cale Yarborough. I have the Silver Fox of David Pearson. And then, of course, I have Rusty Wallace as my last driver making it on the Mount Rushmore for Rockingham Speedway. But let me know your thoughts in the comments. Who would be your Mount Rushmore for Rockingham Speedway? And then tune in next week as I'll go through the Mount Rushmore for Bristol Motor Speedway. And for now, I'm Trackside Larry saying peace.